you have now call it a 6-7 month head start on Daniel Jones, a veteran quarterback that has a lot of similar traits, big arm, athletic, high pedigree, came from a disastrous situation in New York where I don't know if anybody could have thrived. And he kind of goes through a little bit of a rehabilitation process. And now if it's JJ McCarthy, you have a very proven backup veteran guy that continued to improve. If it's not JJ McCarthy, then Daniel Jones is your Sam Darnold of next year. So I think it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant for Daniel Jones's camp. I think it's brilliant for the Vikings to have this forethought and plan ahead. I think of all the top couple scenarios that could have happened for Daniel Jones. This is up there in the top 2 or 3 as far as the best case scenarios for him and his future in the league.
Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast, the NFL powered by Verizon 5G. I am your host, Dave Hellman, and we outdid ourselves for Thanksgiving, y'all. We've got just a bear of a preview episode. So much to get to, so not going to waste a whole lot of time with pleasantries. I hope your Thanksgiving week are going amazingly. I hope you are ready for 4 straight days of fantastic football, one of my favorite weekends of the year. And we've got you covered for all of it. I hope you're ready. So much to get to. Good friend Dave Dameshek, the Shek Show, is hopping on to talk about a huge weekend in the AFC North. Get his expertise as only you could on all things Steelers, not to mention a huge game between the Ravens and the Eagles. We've got our friend Henry McKenna coming on to preview all of the action on Thanksgiving, 3 different games to get to on Turkey Day. Eric Williams dropped by to talk about couple of different games. It's a lot, and that's while burying the lead, because we're going to start the show as we often do with our friend Greg Olsen. He is on the call for one of the best Fox games of the weekend, the Minnesota Vikings playing host to the Arizona Cardinals on Sunday. 2 winning teams with a lot at stake in the NFC playoff race. Let's just jump right into it. Huge episode starting off with Greg. The Vikings and the Cardinals. All right, Greg, Cardinals at the Vikings, early window on Sunday on Fox. I want to start with something that's not going to affect the game because Daniel Jones shouldn't play a role here. He just agreed to sign with the Vikings on Wednesday morning. But I'm fascinated by that. Obviously, you can always use good quarterback depth, but it's so interesting, Kevin O'Connell and the reputation that he's developing, and for good reason, obviously, the success that he's had developing so many different quarterbacks in such a short period of time. What, if you had to pinpoint something about that, is it Kevin O'Connell's demeanor, his approach, his scheme? What has enabled him to be so successful to the point where somebody like Daniel Jones is seeking Minnesota out as a destination?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's a testament to the track record, obviously all the way back to his time with the Rams. I think he obviously has a very unique, position as far as him being a player himself and playing kind of a backup role, kind of mostly in his career, and kind of understanding how to serve the starting quarterback and how to be there as an asset and a resource and be in those meeting rooms and watch really high level quarterback play and study it. And then obviously his time under McVay, both from a scheme standpoint, and then also just from a maturation standpoint and development of different quarterbacks and playing towards strengths and weaknesses. And then it's carried over to now as a head coach, taking them in a playoff run his first year. Then they have a little setback. They regroup. Now they're back on a playoff trajectory, albeit with a new quarterback. And when you factor in that when he signed Sam Darnold, the expectation was they were going to draft a quarterback. JJ McCarthy was going to be the starter. He goes down early in training camp, and Darnold's the day one clear-cut starter, and he's played the best football of his career. So now I think for Minnesota, the understanding is, yes, JJ McCarthy was drafted to get the opportunity that he is the quarterback of the future. So I don't think that's necessarily changed. But if teams have a lot of interest in Sam Darnold, he's there on a 1-year contract. He's shown, obviously, he's a more than capable starter, has played really, really at a high level. If his contract gets outsized and he gets a lot of attention around the league and he goes somewhere else in free agency, you now aren't starting from scratch. You have now call it a 6-7 month head start on Daniel Jones, a veteran quarterback that has a lot of similar traits, big arm, athletic, high pedigree, came from a disastrous situation in New York where I don't know if anybody could have thrived. And he kind of goes through a little bit of a rehabilitation process. And now, if it's JJ McCarthy, you have a very proven backup veteran guy that continued to improve. If it's not JJ McCarthy, then Daniel Jones is your Sam Darnold of next year. So I think it's brilliant. I think it's
Right.
brilliant for Daniel Jones's camp. I think it's brilliant for the Vikings to have this forethought and plan ahead. Um, I think of all the top couple scenarios that could have happened for Daniel Jones. This is up there in the top two or three as far as the best case scenarios for him and his future in the league.
I can't get over like what a valuable asset Kevin O'Connell is becoming. Like I'll help a franchise guy like Kirk Cousins play some of the best ball of his career. You bring me Josh Dobbs in the middle of the season, I'll get good play out of him. I'll help Sam Darnold turn his career around. Like and that so not only like I have no doubt that he can help Daniel Jones play better football, and I have so much confidence that JJ McCarthy will eventually be a useful quarterback, which I mean, what a thing to say about a head coach and a program in Minnesota. I think it's a really, really cool story. Uh,
Absolutely.
all right, let's talk about this game. It's been about 6 weeks since you called a classic, one of the best games of the year between the Vikings and the Lions. I'm just curious from your perspective, it's been enough time. You know, you've been away from this team. Like when you get back onto a team after this many weeks away, what's the first thing you're looking at? What strikes you about the differences since the last time you called a Vikings game?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It's kind of a fun exercise. To your point, it's been a handful of weeks. It's been a while. I go back and I say, okay, I go back to my notes. I think I had them in, what was it, week 5 or 6. I go back and I say, okay, what were my big talking points for the offense? What were my big talking points for the defense? And I kind of carry those over to my new, notes for this week. And then I go back and say, do these things hold up true? Right. So when you start talking about defensively with Brian Flores going into that game against the Lions, it's their willingness to be early down pressure and their blitz package, of course, being tops in the league and, winning early downs to force third and pass. And the Lions going to run against them and pass against them. So like all of those matchups, and you got Van Ginkel who can play on the edge. He can play off the ball. Jonathan Grenard, signing him, his ability to generate pressure. So you start really looking at like the key elements of the talking points for that game. And then you say, okay, is it still the same? Are they still playing similar coverages? Are they adjusted? So that's always fun to see a team and kind of how they evolve. Anything about Brian Flores is everything each week's going to look different, but the menu is still kind of the same. Maybe the menu has changed, but like the feel, the style, the philosophy stays very consistent. It's heavy pressure, it's exotic looks, it's mixed zone coverages, it's simulated pressures. And then on the offensive side of the ball, the storyline was obviously Sam Darnold and his play, under center plays at the highest rate in the league, under center play action and deep shots downfield, and nobody can cover Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison in man-to-man coverage, right? Like that's the starting point with the Vikings offense. And now all these weeks later, it's kind of the same, right? It really hasn't changed. And I can make an argument last week was maybe the best game that Sam Darnold, it's definitely the best game he's played this year for Minnesota. It could be up there. I mean, I haven't studied every career game of his, but it's be up there as far as his best games
He looked
of his
great.
career. I mean, he was fantastic. So it's fun to see growth. He had a couple little issues there. He had the 3-pick game and had a couple tough games, but man, he has just played so solid, so consistent, getting better. Offensive line for Minnesota, a little bit of an issue. Losing Darrisaw at their left tackle spot's been an issue. He obviously was their best, tackle, but overall, it's a lot of the same things we've seen throughout the course of the season.
Feels like so much of the Cardinals' success this year comes from their efficiency running the ball. Drew Petzing, very creative with the way he does it. James Conner, fantastic. Didn't look great last week, and they wound up losing that game. And now Minnesota, most of the metrics say if they're arguably the best run defense in the NFL. How do you, if your offense relies so much on the success of your run game, I mean, do you just try to, break down that brick wall, or do you think that the Cardinals have to pivot here?
Well, I mean, I think that's the $1 million question going in. I think everyone has to ask themselves, being good at the run, being good in the run game doesn't just mean you're a good offense, right? Because the idea of offense is I got to score a lot of points. And we know right now, being really good in the run game is a matter of when do you get those yards. If those yards are coming in the first half and you're running for 85 yards in the first half on 17, 18 carries, you're probably not going to have that many points offensively. It just doesn't generate that many points. Now, if you're getting 160 yards and you're getting 80, 90 of them in down the stretch in the second half, typically you probably threw the ball early in the game, got a lead or got some turnovers or somehow got the lead, and now your really productive run game finishes the game out. So like rush yards are very, I think, misleading in the
Sure,
NFL. So
sure.
as far as this matchup against Minnesota, Minnesota is very good against the rush, very good against the run. A lot of it's because of their willingness to bring pressure. It's very hard in some of these run schemes to block second level pressures. Your run fits, do you want to go zone? Do you want to go gap schemes? What accounts for the movement and the second level pressure? It's not easy to block run game against moving players, which I think is why Brian Flores does it. And then obviously everything's about setting up third and pass. But the one interesting matchup that I have highlighted is Minnesota's going to play a lot of dime and nickel personnel on first and second down. They want to play with more light bodies, more too high shells, and then obviously come down from depth and cause chaos with fast, active bodies, not a bunch of big, heavy base people. But then no team runs more multiple tight end sets than Arizona. I mean, they'll run two tight end, three tight end. Trey McBride, I think, is a stud. So they get into a lot of those heavier bodies. So now the question is, does Minnesota play more base, which is not typically what they do? Or do they feel like they can still control the run game out of some smaller bodies playing nickel and dime? So I think that's going to be a very interesting thing for us to see early in the game, how Flores wants to match that. My gut says Arizona is not going to reinvent themselves. The last week, in their mind, last week is kind of just a one-off. They could not run the ball. The game got away from them. It was kind of a wonky game in the way it happened. They're still the best when they get Connor and they get rolling, and their 4-game win streak was really, to your point, about being really efficient in the ground game, and then Kyler Murray's ability to get outside the pocket and create and attack second-level throws. So I think they want to stay true to what they are. I don't think they're in a position to reinvent themselves, but this Brian Flores defense does bring a lot of challenges you're just not used to seeing each week.
Last thing, you hit on exactly what I wanted to ask you about. I mean, if I've got you on the show, let's talk about a tight end. Trey McBride, unless he's on your fantasy team, I really feel like he's flying under the radar here. I mean, he's top 10 in catches, he's top 20 in yards. We got to get this guy a touchdown at some point this season, but just in general, what do you like about him? I mean, like I said, and unless he's on your fantasy team, I feel like he's flying way under the radar in the league this year.
So I've actually gotten into this on the broadcast before about like, okay, the notion of being good at certain elements of tight end, but you're not great at everything, and it actually makes it harder to be really good. Like if you're a pass catching tight end and you're only on the field on passing downs, it puts so much pressure even if you are really good. And then the same thing with run game. I think the power of Trey McBride is he's on the field for virtually every snap. He's in line. Now, he's in the run game. He's in pass protection. He's chipping. He's getting design throws downfield. He's getting chip flat checkdowns. He gets the volume. He gets the targets because he's on the field so much. If he was just a pass catching wide receiver, some of those 12 catches from last week, a lot of them came on first and second down. A lot of them were when he was blocking and he released into the flat late. Like your volume is able to be so much greater. You get into the rhythm of the game. You're so much more effective because the more I'm in, the less you can key in on what I'm going to do because I'm asked to do everything. Even if I don't do everything the best, doing everything actually makes my life a lot easier. And that was always my game. So like when I watched Trey McBride, I'm like, that was always my game. I'd have 5 real downfield catches a game, deep over routes, crossing, win on one-on-one, which he's more than capable of doing. And then all of a sudden you get 2 or 3 checkdowns, a little flat route. And next thing you know, you got 9 for 110 and you've got a huge day. Like
Right.
that's what I see when I watch him. I like his game. I think he's athletic. I think he's tough. I think he does most of it, like I said, from an inline position, which I always appreciate because that was kind of where I was. I think he can get downfield. I think he's got great range and ball skills. He can run after the catch. Listen, there's the Kelseys and there's the Kittles and Hawkinson's coming back obviously in this game. And there are some names to your point, but I think Trey McBride is as good, as steady as any young tight end, and maybe just any tight end, regardless of their experience, that we have in the NFL right now. I mean, his future is as high, his ceiling is as high as anybody's.
I think that's what makes the Cardinals so fun too, is like, you don't have to get out of like 11 personnel to run the ball. Like they're going to have multiple tight ends on the field for almost everything they do. They can run out of it. They can throw out of it. Like I said, let's get Trey McBride in the end zone a few times in
Yeah.
the last
Hey,
few games. And
when I call games, tight ends score touchdowns. So this is the week.
you heard it here. All right. This is the week for Trey McBride. Should be a really fun one. Greg, have a happy Thanksgiving, man. I'll talk to you soon.
You too, buddy. Take care.
Let's dive into these Thanksgiving games, and let's start with the early one. The Chicago Bears suffered heartbreaking defeats to division opponents 2 weeks in a row at home. Now they get to try their luck on the road against the best team in football. Makes them a perfect candidate for on the road, presented by Honda. Dreams are unstoppable. Detroit Lions have looked unstoppable. We'll see if they can keep it up on Thanksgiving against the Bears. And to preview all of these Thanksgiving games, let's bring in our guy, Henry McKenna of FoxSports.com. Henry, how we doing, man?
I'm good. I'm thankful for you, Dave. I'm thankful for the NFL on Fox podcast. Let's talk Thanksgiving.
Flattery will get you everywhere with me. All right, well, let's jump into your story from this week. You do the quarterback stock exchange every week for FoxSports.com, and I'm not mad. I was surprised Caleb Williams didn't jump higher after the performance that he had. You have him at 19 this week, trending in the right direction, but man, you watch the tape. Some of those throws he was making against the Minnesota Vikings. I mean, I said it earlier, like, I don't care what their record is. I am excited about the Chicago Bears if Caleb Williams is playing this way.
Yeah. I mean, well, to your point, he did sort of flip the script on himself over the last game. But the thing about my stock market is that we weigh the most recent performance higher than the rest of the season, but we can't exclude the rest of the season altogether. And for Caleb, as you well know, the rest of the season has been brutal. In the last 4 weeks going into that game, he had thrown a touchdown, and he's gone 6 weeks this season without a passing touchdown. So, he's a guy who there's so much room for improvement is the nice way to say it. And I think, look, when he came into the NFL, we knew he was a developmental prospect. The problem with that kind of guy is that he needs to go to an organization that can develop him. And we have not seen Chicago to be a hospitable environment for a guy who is sort of the low floor, high ceiling type prospect. We've seen them kind of, I don't want to say ruin him, because he's got plenty of time to improve. And like we saw this week, he will improve with the right oversight. But they made him a worse player, I would say, over the first few weeks. And so, this week it should be so encouraging for Bears fans. Under a new offensive coordinator, all of a sudden, Caleb Williams starts to show, his true potential, to show, hopefully, his true self to Chicago. And I think, the arrow just started pointing up. I hope for sort of, the NFL's sake, really, because I think Williams has the potential to be such a fun player, such a good, NFL changing player. And certainly you put him in a sort of hotbed for sports fandom like Chicago. That's like, that's exactly what the NFL needs. That's what fans, will enjoy. So yeah, I hope this is a career changing game for him. Such a good Minnesota team, such a strong performance. I hope it's sort of a career defining moment for him.
You're so right. I mean, it's such an indictment on the Bears that even with everything that's been wrong with their scheme, obviously they needed to fire Shane Waldron halfway through the season. He's had 4 games with a passer rating over 100. It definitely, he's had plenty of downs. Don't get me wrong. You're on point about the way that he was struggling prior to Shane Waldron getting fired, but the flashes, the talent have been undeniable, and it sucks that it comes with the caveat of, yeah, things were bad enough that they had to make a change halfway through his rookie season. And depending on how this goes, I mean, Bears are 4-7. I expect them to lose this game. I mean, not taking off the table at all that you could have a head coaching change as well. I think at this point, I'm just hoping he's talented enough to overcome the obstacles that his own team seems to be putting in his way.
Yeah, we did see. I mean, Peyton Manning is the overused comparison, but given that I did um, a story previously about Jim Mora and his management of Peyton Manning's development, and I actually spoke to Jim Mora once, the coach of the Colts, back when Manning was drafted, and Mora was talking about the steady progress of Manning throughout the year. Manning's stats looked bad. The Colts record looked bad. Nothing particularly looked good sort of on the first eye test. But as the season progressed and Morris studied the film, really sunk into Manning, spoke to Manning regularly about what he was seeing, what he was thinking. Mora was super confident in Manning's development and wasn't worried at all about, playing him through the struggles, because Manning's confidence wouldn't get shattered, and therefore, psychologically he was sound, physically he was sound. He was going to be a player that was bound for greatness. Ultimately, Tony Dungy came in a few years later and really elevated Manning's game. So we have seen players, deal with coaches, not to knock Jim Mora, but after a coaching change, take a different level of a different caliber of play and perform, more aligned with what we expected from that player. So certainly could happen to see not only a coaching change sort of more soon for Chicago, but for that to ultimately, even if it doesn't happen imminently, if it doesn't happen until, for example, after 2025, we could still see Caleb Williams be an ascending player when he's the number 1 overall pick. Especially, I think he'll get a little bit extra time to develop, and being that we know that he was the kind of guy that maybe has arm arrogance and would ultimately rely too heavily on that arm, that takes some coaching out of a guy. It takes some humbling out of a guy for them to get acclimated to the NFL.
I love the phrase arm arrogance. I think it applies to Caleb Williams very well. On the Detroit side of this, I have a couple thoughts. One, my eyes popped out of my head when I saw that the line for this game is 10 points. I mean, even with the Lions at home, even knowing that they have been beating the hell out of everybody, this is a division game on a short week. I fully expect this to be more competitive than some of the Lions' other beatdowns here over the last 3-4 weeks. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is, and the reason I was thinking about this, I thought back to last year's Lions game on Thanksgiving against the Packers, just a complete meltdown from a turnover perspective. I went back and looked, the Lions turned the ball over multiple times in half their games last year. They had 3 against the Packers. They turned it over 7 times in 2 games against the Chicago Bears last year. This is going to sound ironic because I know we all remember the 5 turnover game they just had against the Texans a few weeks ago, but that has not been a problem for the Lions. And on top of all of the talent, I think that is such a difference maker. They have avoided a turnover period in half of their games. Just outstanding ball security, with the obvious exception of 1 game. I think that makes them a very, very tough team to beat, on top of all of the obvious edges and talent.
Yeah. I do actually think that the Lions will probably cover here.
You're taking the cover.
I think I would. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, that's not the kind of line that I like to bet on, something that big. And like you're saying, divisional game, I tend to stay away from that sort of line. But I think that the Lions will cover it. Look, when there is coaching turnover, it creates momentum within the locker room, and it creates games like what we saw between the Bears and the Vikings. And the Bears outperformed, what they'd done the rest of the season. But what I think ultimately happens in this game is the Bears regress back to the mean of who they are this year, and the Lions, no matter what their history is on Thanksgiving, which is very bad, and they have a history. What is it, 10 years since they've won a game? It's not good. But I still think that given what we know about how well Jared Goff is playing, the efficiency level that he's at, the way they lean on the run game, The way that Dan Campbell so many years ago promised teams that bite the kneecaps off their players, and my goodness, did he deliver. That's the kind of game they'll be so ready for turkey that they're actually biting the kneecaps off of their opponents in this game. And I think ultimately the Lions are going to manhandle the Bears.
I could see a backdoor cover. Like if you tell me the Lions win this game by 14 points, I'm with you. But I think this is going to be a tougher task than some of these beatdowns we've been watching the Lions putting on opponents. We'll see how it goes. Moving on, mid-window right here on Fox. Tom Brady's on the call. The Giants are at the Cowboys. And you know what, Henry? At the 11th hour, I found something to get really excited about in this game. And that's that I'm legitimately interested to see Drew Lock. And that's what sounds like is going to happen. All the word coming out of New York right now is that Tommy DeVito might not be ready for this game. Drew Lock would be the next man up. He started the season as the backup in New York. Like, my last memory of Drew Lock is the wonderful game he played against Philly on Monday Night Football for the Seahawks last year. Led them down the field to win the game at the end. Drew Lock with Malik Neighbors, like, is that doing anything for you?
I was literally going to mention Malik Neighbors, because even if Drew Lock doesn't, I'm kind of like a QB nerd as I should be, writing the quarterback stock market every week. I love seeing a guy like Drew Lock kind of recycle back into the starting lineup, as bizarre as that sounds. And he's a guy that's been waiting his turn in New York for a bit longer than he should have had to, because of the Daniel Jones contract extension. That forced the Giants to play him longer than they should have. So Lock's kind of in that QB1 spot. We'll see if that's overdue or not. And then most importantly, we'll see a little bit heavier usage of Malik Neighbors. I'm almost certain, right? Like, they can't use him like less than they have recently. And he's got a 99 separation score on the ESPN ranking. They have these, receiver grades that they do, not unlike Pro Football Focus or and other advanced services. So, like, that's a guy who is, always open. And like, I don't think that we've seen a statistical measurement in any way, show the results of that. So put a new quarterback in. He's not Tommy DeVito, which was kind of a waste of time, and he's not Daniel Jones, who was kind of also a waste of time. So we'll see if Drew Lock is a waste of time. I don't think that he will be. I think that he'll be an upgrade, and I think that will instantly make Malik Neighbors the truly electric player that he really is, but we just haven't seen the results yet.
I'm going to watch regardless, because I'm a sicko like that, but I do think that gives this game some higher potential. Cowboys are home favorites, certainly not ruling out that they win this game. For me, though, what's going to be interesting with the Cowboys is the narrative side of this if they do win, because Jerry Jones is already on local radio in Dallas saying it's not crazy to think Mike McCarthy could get an extension. Wild thing to say when they've lost 5 of their last 6, but they win this game. They're 5-7, and just the narratives are going to be very funny around the Cowboys. We'll see if they can pull off the win. Let's wrap it up. Late window, NBC, the Miami Dolphins going up to face the Green Bay Packers. Cold weather game for Miami. You know the spiel with all of that. But I want to talk to you. We'll just keep it quarterback focused here, since you write the stock market. Tua, Henry, goodness gracious, completing 76% of his passes since he came back. Almost 1,300 yards, 11 touchdowns, and just 1 interception. The guy is on a heater. I don't think most people have been paying attention to that, because the Dolphins' record is bad and they've been playing most of their games at 1 p.m. Eastern, but this is a big opportunity for him to announce himself.
Yeah. I mean, I love Tua. I have for many years. Obviously, I've been covering the AFC East prior to being more national this year. And so watched him closely. I was there in week 2 when he suffered the concussion. And look, I think that the time we saw with him not in the offensive lineup was yet again a testament to his tremendous value of this Miami offense. I would argue that given the way that the Dolphins operate their offense, that there is no greater loss to an offense. And I mean Patrick Mahomes, I mean Josh Allen, I mean Lamar Jackson. I don't think there's a single quarterback in the NFL that when he leaves the lineup is a bigger value loss than Tua It's just that simple. It's a timing-based offense. He operates it in a way that nobody else can, and certainly operates it at a level that a backup cannot operate it. We've seen that for multiple backups. Maybe it's Teddy Bridgewater, maybe it's Skylar Thompson, maybe it's Scoop Huntley. Like, none of these guys have gotten the job done. That's partially an indictment on Mike McDaniel. I get that. But I think you try and replace a Lamar, you try and replace a Patrick Mahomes. The coaches figure out how to make that guy work. Tua is an MVP for the Dolphins in a way that I don't see many teams like value a player. So not only is the absence sort of like value added in a way, like for us to see it, but then also for him to return and play so supremely well, not unlike what we saw last year. But here comes the asterisk, right? You said, heater, and we're headed into a cold game. And Miami is infamous for going flat in cold games. And so I want to see, I was talking to someone within the organization this offseason, and they told me, our only problem is cold weather. And I was like, okay, well, you can't make the weather warmer. Like, how are you guys going to figure that out? And the person told me, well, we feel confident that we have figured it out. I can't tell you what it is. I was like, okay, well, they're probably just like, they've got, that water bottle that reads secret sauce across it. That's what they've, you know what I mean? Like, it feels a bit voodoo-ish, but they think that they've got an answer to cold weather games. And I would like to see what that is. Maybe it's simply Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane, which we've seen.
Thank you for bringing it up. That's what I was about to say. Because I don't know if that's their secret sauce, but this stat is crazy, Henry, and I'm sure you know it. But for anybody that's unaware, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are only accounting for 34% of Tua's target share combined these last 5 weeks. Like, they're still catching the ball. They're still playing a role in the offense, but the Dolphins were notorious for just having the most laughable splits where it's Tyreek and Jalen are catching everything and nobody else is doing anything. That's just not the case right now. Jonnu Smith, Devon Achane are such a big part of this. Tua's air yards per attempt is last in the league, which, I mean, it's clearly working, but I wonder if the answer is to try to get, smaller, more methodical, don't rely so much on the vertical passing game, and maybe that'll help you in adverse conditions. I don't know. What do you think?
No, I think that could be it, right? Like, the timing-based element of the Dolphins offense gets thrown off a little bit in cold weather. It's simple, like physics, actually. I shouldn't say it's simple because I actually don't know, but that, like, our bodies just don't move quite as fast in cold weather, especially in terms of acceleration and reaction. And so that's how finely tuned offenses are in the NFL, that those little milliseconds when they get thrown off can negatively impact the timing-based offense like Miami. So there's that element where Tyreek and Waddle are their types of routes are very highly based off of that. So make it a little bit different, rely on tight ends who can be more physical. They don't necessarily need that, minute millisecond level timing. Running backs are sort of the same way, where they naturally have separation given where they line up in the backfield and where they often go to, which is the flat. So I think that's sort of like a natural way to move to try and solve this problem of cold weather, especially. And then also just like being more multiple of an offense, having answers when Tyreek Hill can't go over 100 yards. I think that's a strong, testament of progress for Mike McDaniel. And then, like, we haven't really talked about the run game because it's the Dolphins and they love to pass, but Achane can run very well between the tackles. He is playing, as well as he's ever played, and he's pretty consistently getting, a fair amount of touches. So I think this offense is changing sort of before our very eyes. And if they were not in a losing situation, if they didn't have a 15% chance of making the playoffs, which is what next gen stats gives them right now, we'd be really talking about Mike McDaniel's great job over the last few weeks, even though they struggled without Tua. So it's a really interesting situation for Miami, and a lot of it is going to come to a head against the Packers. I also think, like, I don't know, speaking of betting lines, like, I don't know what Jordan Love's like over under is for interceptions, but like that could ultimately determine how this game goes, because Jordan Love is like, ever since he's gotten his contract, he's been playing like he's Josh Allen. And it's like, dude, you're not Josh Allen yet. I think that you are going to someday be a skinny Josh Allen. But he thinks that he can erase his mistakes in the same way that Josh Allen did, at least last year. This year, we're not seeing as many mistakes from Josh Allen. I think ultimately the interceptions, if it's what it's been recently with Jordan Love, Miami's got an obscenely good defense. We can't really talk about it again because of their record, but like they were really bad last year against Vic Fangio, and this year under Anthony Weaver, this is a very, very tough defense.
They're solid all over. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, let's see some turnovers from Miami's defense. Let's bait Jordan Love into making some bad decisions. It's not that hard right now. And let's see Tua, take over the game as the game manager, expert that he is.
Yeah, I'm curious. I just want to see if the Packers are willing to play a boring game like they did last week, where you just let Josh Jacobs take over and be the focal point. I know the Dolphins are top 10, maybe 11th in run defense and run efficiency. I'm not saying it would be easy, but night game at Lambeau in the cold, last time I looked, the temperature was supposed to be around 20. This is a game to just play workman-like football, and spare me the back foot throws and the circus stuff from Jordan Love. Just play ground and pound NFC North type football and get the hell out of there. I'm curious to see if the Packers are patient enough to do it. And obviously I think the big story is whether the Dolphins can do it at all, because that's the change we need to see from them. Right. So huge, like I said, opportunity for the Dolphins. And you're right. The probabilities say it's just 15%, but man, if you can win this game, then Miami can win all of the rest of the games on their schedule, and they would be at 500 heading into the final month of the season. It's, I'm interested in the Dolphins right now, but I'm turning the knob to 11 if they find a way to beat the Packers.
Yeah, I think the playoff picture is a little complicated with the Broncos kind of sitting in that last playoff spot. So they'd have to knock Denver out, I believe. And they're certainly not knocking the Bills out of the divisional hunt. So I think it's a very tricky uphill climb for them to make their way into that actual seeding that they need to make it into. But like, for example, I do think Mike McDaniel might be kind of coaching for his job a little bit this year. So maybe not, but I think like ultimately it's a pride thing. It's like a performance thing. I think this team was pretty embarrassed with Tua coming back from injury. They even lost in his debut upon his return. Like there were some seriously low moments in Miami this year, starting with the concussion, going through without Tua and then his return. So I think they need to end this season on a high note, regardless of whether they make it to the playoffs. I think there's a real question of like leadership in Miami if they can't play well down the stretch here, because the pieces are too good for them not to be relevant.
Needless to say, really high stakes for the Miami Dolphins and Lambeau. Henry, that does it for the Thanksgiving games, man. Always good to talk to you. Hope you have a fantastic holiday. We'll catch up with you on the other side.
Yeah. Hope everybody listening has a great holiday.
All right. I'm really excited for this one. Joining me now, Dave Dameshek, host of the Shek Show, longtime Steeler aficionado, NFL historian, one of the best personalities doing NFL coverage for as long as I've been in the game. And Dave, I think this qualifies as a first time, long time thing. I mean, I've been following your work for as long as I can remember, but this is the first time I've ever worked with you in an official capacity. So super pumped to have you on, man. How we doing?
I'm doing well, even better now for finally making this connection, because ditto, I've been following you and enjoying your work for quite some time. So let's kibitz about it, shall we?
So I can't think of a better person to talk to. Two of the best matchups in Week 13 are both AFC North games. We got Steelers and Bengals in the early window, CBS, and then probably the game of the week, obviously Eagles at Ravens in the late window. Let's start with your guys, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Setback on Thursday night in the lake snow in Cleveland, and it's another AFC North game. They go to play the Bengals. Dave, I gotta know, I'm curious because me as a neutral, I'm just like, yes, more AFC North football. Let's do it every single week. But this is week 3 in a row of AFC North games, and there's another one after this. Like, are you sick of this? Are you pissed about the way the Steelers division schedule is backloaded, or are you like, yeah, let's go?
Yeah, it was bizarre the way they the schedule makers put it together that all 6 of the Steelers divisional games are, I mean, now we're into the midst of them, but yeah, it's pretty weird, and I don't know if it's such an anomaly that it's never happened before that a team had to play all 6 of its division games. Um it ain't ideal, but they ain't going to change it either. Sort
Sure.
of like, remember during COVID when the Steelers and Ravens played on a Wednesday at like, I think like 8:15 in the morning or something like that. I don't remember what. It's like you can bellyache about it, but no one's going to care. And it's still going to count in the standings the same as the other games do. So dealing with it, the issue is, and I have fallen prey to what I always caution people against doing, which is to overreact to the most recent piece of evidence delivered to us in the ongoing story of a football season. And I'm talking about the snow globe game in Cleveland, which, by the way, may have, I don't know until I see. I won't know until future Dave experiences another snow football game. But of course, this is what I've pined for, and I assume most football fans have pined for eternally. And now it's ruined for me. We lost to the bum Browns. We lost to Jameis Winston in the snow. And now I don't know if I see snow, if I'm going to have a negative reaction, a negative association with it. And I think that's because not just by itself do you not want to lose a game to the Cleveland Browns ever, given the state of that team right now, is that it does feel like it has kind of turned the season in a couple of ways downward for the Steelers coming off of the big win against the Ravens. And with the win against the Chargers on Monday Night Football, now I do kind of buy that the Ravens have, while the Steelers technically control their destiny, it does set up a scooch better for the Ravens at this point. And I do worry with the rugged schedule that awaits now. The easiest games that the Steelers are going to have are Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And if they can beat Cincy on Sunday, it sets the Steelers up for, the Bengals are probably out of things if the Steelers can take them down on Sunday. So that sets up for a breezier rematch later in the season here. So I do worry though that not getting to 9-2 with the worst of the schedule still upcoming is going to haunt them a little bit when it comes playoff time. I do think they obviously are going to wind up in the mix, but a little bit worse than they might have been. They're not going to probably have a home game at this point, as a for instance.
That's such. I think both sides of that are so valid because you're right. We overreact to every result. And do I want to hear it from George Pickens right after the game? Not really. Like, I don't know that it's a good look for George Pickens to say that the team that just beat him is not that good. But I get it too, though. It's like, look, this is a once a season type of event. This is the conditions in the second half of that game maybe didn't give you a chance to put your true best foot forward. So I'm trying not to overreact to the most recent game, but at the same time, it does feel like it's going to be a slog to the finish for the Steelers. And even games like this, like on paper, 4-7 Cincinnati, it should be a game that the Steelers have a good chance in. But man, the way Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are playing, if this isn't another one that, like, if this doesn't come down to the wire, I'm honestly going to be very surprised.
You have to know who you are. You have to understand the oneself, and the Steelers should at least understand that they are not the Chiefs or the Bills or the Lions in 2024, which is to say, shrug off a bad loss and move on to next week. The Steelers, the highest end of the NFL right now does feel like they've shifted, led by the Kansas City Chiefs, in sort of an NBA regular season kind of vibe, which is sort of like we're fine tuning. We're trying to figure out our rotation so that we're right for springtime. And it does feel like the real contenders, the teams that I think 95% of us at least expect are going to be playing in New Orleans in February fit that description. Like we're just trying to stretch out Travis Kelce and Chris Jones and not overuse them and get them so that they're ready to roll when the games really matter. That's not the Steelers. The Steelers need to take care of business against lesser teams, and they failed to do that. The Bengals are an interesting case, of course, because they're 4-7, as you say, and their 4 wins are against some pretty crummy teams. So it's hard to have much optimism unless you happen to have turned the TV on when they're playing, and then you say, who's beating this team? When you watch them, at least on offense. Now, of course, the defense is an atrocity. I'm a big believer in head-to-head mini-era rivalries and the results that they give you in the sort of rando result world of pro football. One thing that's semi-dependable is when the same 2 teams play each other regularly over, a 3 or 5 year period. I think an example that everybody kind of sort of leaned into when Brady was with the Buccaneers was the Saints and the Bucks. For whatever reason, the Saints could take care of business even against, it's just one of those things. And the Bengals, the Steelers lose games like they just did to Cleveland because it's a weird sort of reality, but to accept. And I don't think non-Steelers people, and even a lot of Steelers fans probably are so loony as I that they think these things through. But, from the moment Roethlisberger hurts his elbow in 2019 in week 2 against Russell Wilson, coincidentally, and the Seahawks, when he hurts his elbow in 2019, from that point forward, and it's been a half a decade now, obviously, Mike Tomlin shifted into this mindset of we are just going to turn every game into a knuckleball. And even if we're playing the worst team in the league or we're playing the best team in the league, it's going to look kind of the same. We're going to drag every team down in the mud, even the QB league, even the teams that expect to score 30 a game are going to play our level of ball, and it's going to get ugly. And sometimes we're going to be the ones who end up dirty. Witness losing to Jameis Winston's Browns on a Thursday night when you have no business. But the trade-off is beating teams like the Ravens. One of the very few exceptions to that is Joe Burrow and the Bengals. They have taken care of the Steelers when Burrow is healthy. The asterisk you have to put on this one, though, is that Burrow hasn't really been right against Pittsburgh in 3 years now, injuries and otherwise. So we haven't really seen a lot of this, a ton of evidence of Cincy v. Pittsburgh during the Joe Burrow era, at least not in the last couple of years. But when he's out there and has, Chase and Higgins and his weapons, or most of, they do tend to get the better of the Steelers defense. Obviously, there's some different pieces on both sides of the ball at this point. But unfortunately for Steelers fans, I do think that this is one that the Bengals get. It's a huge spot for them. I'm not going to call it a must-win game because, of course, they will. I'm almost positive Kamish Goodell will compel the Bengals to play in week 14, whether they win or lose. They're going to have to play out their whole schedule. I'm like 60-40 on
they
that.
will
that
play
they're going to have to
the next
that they're going to have to play
what.
out the schedule. So it's not must win because, when you lose a must win game, the season is over for you. That being said, it is an important one. I don't think it's funny. I like that top 6 is pretty solid in the AFC side of things, but that 7th team is going to be meh, probably. The Bengals have a real shot at it. The Colts and Broncos play on the 15th of December. The Dolphins have a real tough slog ahead. The Bengals' 2 toughest games left are against Pittsburgh, home and away. If they win those, if you go through the schedule there, I know it's a tough thing to do to win 7 in a row, but if you look at it, they really are positioned to do it if they can handle Pittsburgh. And I have a feeling in Queen City, in a big spot, Joe Burrow's going to deliver at least enough to get past Russ and company.
I hear you. And yeah, like you watch the Bengals offense, they look like a Super Bowl team, but I feel like I've been saying that for a month now. And look, I mean, I got the Joe Burrow mini helmet behind me. All right. So like I'm invested. People give me shit about that, but at the same time, like this team has enough flaws. You make the wonderful point about the Steelers' style of football. I mean,
Alex Highsmith's hopeful he'll be back for this game. I looked this up. The Bengals have allowed the second most pressures in the league over the last 3 weeks. They didn't play in one of those weeks. They're second in the league in pressures despite a bye week. So this Steelers front could make life really difficult on the Bengals. I mean, I get enamored with the Bengals passing attack. Who doesn't? But I'm waiting for these results to start coming because, to your point, they've only been able to beat some pretty bad teams for the most part this year.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel, I mean, maybe this is simplistic, but it does feel like get Jamar Chase to the ground. If you can heat up Burrow, then he's getting the ball out more quickly. And that means Jamar Chase trying to make plays with his legs. Don't let him. And that's, that would be if I were the defensive coordinator of the Steelers or really any pro football team. That would be my counsel to my players, would be like, when the other team, when they have the ball, get him to the ground, like tackle him. And if he's like, I don't want to get tackled, be like, too bad. I got to get you to the ground, man, because that's my job. That's what, if Jamar Chase is snapping off a lot of yards after catch, the Steelers will be in trouble if they can tackle it, because it is remarkable, and they are 4-7. And so for all the swooning about like Joe Burrow is playing an MVP caliber ball, they are 4-7. And again, the quartet of teams they've beaten are bum teams, and yet again, if you watch them play the Ravens in either one of those games, it feels borderline unstoppable. And then that kind of where we started here with AFC North ball and what that means and how it resonates in your brain, it's very different than the reality of the Baltimore Ravens versus the Cincinnati Bengals when they go head to head, because those are shootout games. And now it's really a battle for the soul of the AFC North. Is Tomlin able to drag the Bengals into an AFC North style game, which is maybe neither team will get to 20. There'll be some turnovers. There'll be some ugly stuff. There'll be some like, whoa, what was that you were looking at? You'll pick your head up and someone will have won by 3 or fewer points. Whereas Cincy aspires to and has largely succeeded in, and since Burrow arrived there, in turn, along with Lamar Jackson, turning it into what looks like NFL football in the 21st century, which is high point totals, guys slinging the ball all over the field, all the rest of it.
It'll be incredible either way, because Russ and Pickens and Mike Williams can produce some big plays. So if it's going to be a shootout, I think that can be really fun. Or a good old fashioned street fight is always a-okay with me.
Can you beat the hell out? I mean, like the premise that you could see a mile away with what Tomlin is doing with Pickett and Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, if you remember him, and all the rest of it. Since again, and
Steeler legend,
Roethlisberger can't move off his spot. Roethlisberger had 2 prosthetic legs for his last 2 years. A lot of people don't know that. That's why he couldn't move. But during this 5-year window, the intent is to just ugly it up as much as possible, because you have at the most important position, you are always at a disadvantage almost every single game you play. And so as much as possible, you want to marginalize the impact of the quarterback. I'm anxious to watch, but the goal is clearly, since Omar Khan and Andy Weidel and the rest got in there, was to just get as physical, to bring in a bunch of big dudes who could beat the hell out of you, because Patrick Mahomes is not available to a team that is going to always win 9 or 10 games. You just have no path to get Josh Allen and Justin Herbert and those guys. And so you have to play a different style of ball. And it's been mostly successful for, like I say, half a decade. But the liability is, can you win 3 games against the best teams in the conference in January when it matters most? To this point, the answer is no. 0 wins for Mike Tomlin. But it is hard to deny how remarkable this run is for Tomlin to always get these teams over 500 in the free agency era.
I'm pro Tomlin. I mean, it's interesting. Like, the Steelers have shown like an inkling of having a higher ceiling since they put Russ into the lineup. But now let's see how you do. I mean, mixed results so far, but there's so many big games left on their schedule. Let's see how that ages, because it's not always
like, yeah, we
be the
can't
Jets.
If we want to announce that we know what the Steelers are, then we're trying to pretend that we've read the end of the book. And like I say, this chapter book of an NFL season is far from complete. And the biggest indicators are still to come here. We're just now moving into Act 3.
Let's talk about a game that I don't think I have to guess at what this is going to be. Eagles at Ravens. If it's not some sort of shootout, I will be surprised. I just don't see this being an 18-16 type of game. Obviously, the running backs are going to take center stage. If we can assume, and I'm not ready to believe that a running back can win MVP in 2024, I need to see more. If we can assume that a quarterback is going to win MVP, do we just give Offensive Player of the Year to whoever has the better day here between Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry?
The world's got bigger problems, but I do think we really do need to plant our flag. Let's do it, Hellman. Let everybody talk.
What are we planting? Let's go.
What we have to do is we have to be the change. We need to create a different award. So because the math is that, well, Offensive Player of the Year goes to the best non-QB. And it's like, well, that's jive. It's the MVP, most valuable player. It's not, you need to identify best quarterback. Do that. There should be an award if it is always going to rise above, because in 2024, clearly Saquon Barkley has elevated the Eagles. I said before the season, I'll admit when I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong, like Jerry Orbach at the end of Dirty Dancing. I was wrong about how valuable Saquon could be to this Eagles team. And the math for me was, I get Saquon Barkley when healthy is better than DeAndre Swift, but is he that much better that he's going to elevate the Eagles by, 1 to 3 wins over what DeAndre Swift is their primary back? The answer is apparently yes. He is going to do that. The thing I was right about, though, when you say it's not going to be 18-16 and it's likely to be a shootout, I'm with you completely. I think this is like a 34-30 type of game. But the two things that I was right about in August while I was being wrong about Saquon was, first of all, the Eagles are a young but very talented defense. And if they can bridge the gap
Getting
from
better
the first half of the season to this point, you're going to see that defense tune it up. And now I'm looking smart for having said that, because the back end of that defense is coming on. A lot of nice young pieces back there. And you want to talk about Offensive Player of the Year and MVP and everything else. Jalen Carter, people go off of the numbers, sack totals and all of that, but there's a powerful case that Jalen Carter is the most valuable defensive piece in football right now. And in fact, I do the Jenga theory that in the 21st century, every football team is going to have some injuries. The key is to not get the one guy who, if you pull him out of the Jenga stack, the whole thing's going to implode. Jalen Carter might be the biggest Jenga piece, not just physically, figuratively too, going in football. But that back end, like I say, for Philly is coming on quite a bit. And that looks good. Conversely, what I've been saying for 10 months is Baltimore going to do anything about their pass defense? I mean, the offensive line, Ronnie Stanley was a wild card because since his knee injury, and that was a protracted comeback, like 3 years, and now he does seem all the way back. But okay, so the offensive line is largely
they've been better than I thought.
Yeah, a little bit better than I thought.
Expected.
But that pass defense is going to be a plague for them. And for all the swooning about it is funny, talk about what have you done for me lately. A week and a half or so ago, the Steelers manhandled the Ravens. That's why they won that game. And Justin Tucker couldn't kick anymore, which is hysterical and ironic and all that he's the only guy in the league who can't make 50-plus yarders anymore. But the Steelers beat up the Ravens, and that's why they won that game. But then the Ravens play in LA and they beat the Chargers. And now it's like that game in Pittsburgh never happened. He is now the darling once again, Lamar and Derrick Henry, and they are unstoppable and everything else. But watching that game, Quentin Johnson catches that crosser. He catches
any of the 5 targets.
Well, right. I mean, I can point at a couple of plays that you flip, and it's not really a whole lot of what if in that I'm doing that, Harbaugh goes for it from his side of the field with less than a minute to go in the first half. Ballsy move, kind of crazy. They get it. deep shot for the touchdown. And, people what a pass that was. I don't know, it was a ball that could have been picked, really. That was a 50-50 ball, and the DB just didn't get his head around on it. And then Quentin Johnson catches that crosser. I think he houses that ball. And if it is, it's a tie game. I mean, the Ravens, every NFL game, or most of them, are one-score games. And you can point at one play or three and say if it goes differently, then that team loses. But the Ravens play that brand every week, it seems, unless they just are completely annihilating the team like they did the Broncos. So many of their games come down to a play here and play there, and Lamar's special qualities also jam the team up periodically. And I do not buy that the Ravens are built to win 3 games in January against 3 of the best teams in the conference because of that. Not because of Lamar throws games away, but he has a risky style of play. But then marry that with, if you get into shootouts in fourth quarter, you're in trouble. I mean, Kyle Van Noy, like your pass rush is dependent on Kyle Van Noy. That's it. The comebacks against them are not a mirage. They keep happening. And so I get excited about another MVP level season from Lamar Jackson. I do not buy that team's going to the Super Bowl this year. I would take the Bills. Certainly, if I had to say it's not going to be the Chiefs, I would say it will be the Ravens. But I like Philly to survive this one.
I've got complicated thoughts on the Ravens. I think you laid it out pretty perfectly. I mean, on their day, they might be the best team in football, and I don't know how many teams can keep them from having a day like that. But I don't think it's a coincidence that they have such inconsistencies. I don't think it's a coincidence that things kind of fall apart when they're not clicking that way. Like, they know how to win in that very impressive fashion. And when they have to pivot the way that you often have to do when you play great teams, it doesn't always look so good. And I've got the numbers in front of me, man. 94 explosive pass plays allowed this year is the worst in the league. I know they got after Justin Herbert the other day, but they're generating pressure just 32% of the time, which is not good. They were much better at it last year, whether that was because Clowney helped them out so much or because they were just better at bringing blitzes from different places. I said before the season, I'll gladly eat that the offensive line has been a lot better than I thought, but people just completely glossed over the loss of Mike McDonald like it wasn't going to be a big deal, and it kind of looks like a big deal.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it takes a minute for that absence to really hit. Look at the Eagles a year ago. It's a great point that I love to. You lose your 2 coordinators as the Eagles did the year after the Super Bowl, or in the days after they lose that Super Bowl, and it's not the impact isn't devastating. A week later, it takes a minute, but other teams, other offensive coordinators, other teams start to figure out what you're not doing, what your liabilities now are that didn't exist a year ago. But it takes a few weeks worth of tape and otherwise to figure out what those deficiencies are. But to Devil's Dameshek, exactly what we're talking about right now. I grew up watching Air Coryell, and that was a powerful lesson. Like, nobody could stop Dan Fouts and the Chargers. They could light up the scoreboard, and then that became Dan Marino and the Dolphins. And they did not succeed, and I can talk about that for a number of reasons why Marino was let down by Don Shula and all of that. But
you are an NFL historian, like I said at the top, totally justified.
Oh, listen, if you don't mind me self-promoting, I've just put out for Meadowlark, look for the Lebitard or Dameshek handles on social media. I just did a thing like, what if what if Dan Marino was in his prime right now? And it has a lot of the interesting connection is, as I started to put it together, was this is what ails Josh Allen right now. He is playing with Sean McDermott, who is not a bad coach per se, but a defensive-minded head coach at this point in the 21st century maybe is not what you want. Look at who's more valuable to the Detroit Lions right now. Is it Jared Goff or is it Ben Johnson? At the height of their powers, is Brock Purdy the actual most valuable piece there,
Just
or is it Kyle
diving
Shanahan's
into all
offense?
of the most polarizing conversations in the NFL right now. I
I
love
mean,
it. I love it
O'Connell
a
or
lot.
Sam Darnold or Danny Dimes, either way. Um, the coordinator is the one that is making it go. And so I do wonder if because there are inflection points in the Super Bowl era from, free agency and, the Mel Blount rule back in 1978 that impact the results on the field. And it is so offense friendly now that I do wonder if, whereas 15 years ago, even you couldn't win a Super Bowl, you could do great stuff. You could win 13 games and make some hay in the playoffs, but you ultimately weren't going to win the Lombardi if you had a bum defense. I wonder if that's now not true. Lions and Ravens in the Super Bowl doesn't sound insane to me. In fact, the outlier of the heavyweight teams right now is the Chiefs, who are not lighting up the scoreboard and are kind of sort of leaning on a defense, although it hasn't been as good the last couple of weeks. But they're the weird outlier. Everybody else we're talking about, the Bills and the Eagles and the Lions, are just, they're shooted out teams. And it's like, all right, well, so we can't stop anybody, but nobody else stops anybody either. So maybe we'll survive in the Super Bowl 112 to 109,
it feels more plausible than it used to, but I don't know, man. Some of these recent results still stick with me. I mean, I know, the Niners beat the Lions in a shootout, but that Chiefs-Ravens game is going to stick with me well, at least until I see somebody, take down that blueprint. And that's very quietly. I don't go in on predictions much on the show because who the hell knows what's going to happen. But I think this Eagles team, as much as the Eagles can fly under the radar, I think they are really coming together in a very complete way. And I think they win this game against the Ravens. I think their defense is better. I think they're just as explosive on offense.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think you still need that stuff to go on these types of runs, even if it's less important than it used to be. And yeah, I'm interested to see if the Eagles can
Absolutely
live up to how good I think they are. Because if I'm trying to pick the short list of Super Bowl teams, the Eagles are in the three that I feel the best about right now after the way they've played the last 6 or
I
so
mean, it's
weeks.
maybe the Packers, but outside of them, and I do think you've mentioned McDonald. I do think it's funny that Seahawks team, talk about quiet. They are very quietly. The pieces that he wanted to lean on were unavailable because of injury, and he's just putting it together. But beware that team. They might win the division, the Seahawks. But yeah, Packers are maybe a factor, but it does feel like inevitably, which means it definitely won't happen. But Lions and Eagles is your title game on one side, and it feels like Chiefs, Bills, maybe Ravens on the AFC side of things. It's kind of boiled down already. I know we want to entertain the idea of
No, I think that's
maybe if we
exactly
get
right.
pull the inside straight, that team can get there, and we see it happen periodically. But I mean, it really does feel like we know who the actual contenders, not teams contenders to win a game in the playoffs. I'm talking about teams that could wind up playing in New Orleans. I think it's like 5 teams at this point.
So when we get our Broncos Steelers AFC title game, we will have to have you back on because that's the way the NFL works. Either way, I would love to check back in with you in January and see how all of this went. Dave Dameshek, please, if you don't already, go find the Shek Show wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all those good platforms. You can find his good work there. This was a lot of fun, man. I'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Pally. Appreciate you.
Thanks again to Dave Dameshek. Now let's take a look at 2 West Coast teams making big road trips out east for Week 13. To preview those 2 matchups, I was joined by Fox Sports reporter Eric Williams.
All right, Eric, 2 games to get to. Let's start with the one early on Sunday. The LA Chargers, fresh off of a Monday night loss to Baltimore, they travel to face the Atlanta Falcons. Cross-country trip on a short week. And if that wasn't bad enough, we are currently still waiting to hear about the severity of J.K. Dobbins' knee injury. I guess for full transparency's sake, I'll just let y'all know Eric and I are recording this on Tuesday. It's Thanksgiving. You got to do what you got to do. But we're sitting here wondering, and based on the fact that J.K. Dobbins left early, Eric, at the very least, I'm not expecting him to be available for this game. I guess we'll see. But that's where I want to start is where do the Chargers go from here in the run game if he is unavailable?
Yeah, you're right, David. It's huge because he's been the guy that's been carrying the load offensively for them, particularly been able to get into the end zone on a regular basis. I would imagine they're going to lean on Gus Edwards. That would be the guy that would be kind of the bell cow back if Dobbins is not available to go. Dobbins also has a significant injury history when you look at what's happened, on the Ravens and everything that he's worked through. So I would imagine they're going to be on the careful side in terms of, long term, him being around. So again, I would expect Gus to be the main guy in terms of carrying the load offensively for a team that wants to run the football. I think in just watching that game unfold, it's kind of what I expected. This is a team that's solid in the first year under Jim Harbaugh, but it's a team that's not special in terms of their playmakers. Lad McConkey was carrying them in terms of the passing offense, but you can't have Will Dissly be your second leading receiver, a guy that you brought in as a run blocking tight end in terms of their passing offense. And so, Quentin Johnson has to step up. He had 5 targets, but 0 catches in that game. They need more from him offensively, although he does have 6 touchdowns. And then the offseason, they need to go out and get a legit number 1 receiver to give Justin Herbert a guy that he can lean on in terms of creating explosive plays. They had just their longest passing reception was 17 yards. Longest rushing was 19 yards. So no explosiveness in that offense, and they need to kind of build on that.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I wanted to get into it. And it's a tough spot for the Chargers to be, right? Like the trade deadline passed a long time ago. For the most part, anybody that can really help you is employed. Like there's not a lot sitting out there to help you fix this offense. But man, there's got to be a way you can like scheme around some of these deficiencies. Because look, Eric, Justin Herbert's like the nicest, most demure franchise quarterback in the NFL. But behind closed doors, I got to believe Justin Herbert is like, guys, I cannot keep throwing the ball to Quentin Johnston and Jalen Reagor and waiting to see how they're going to mess it up. Because it sounds harsh, but that's what we're watching week after week with these guys. If you got to make all of your targets go to Lad McConkey and Will Dissly, I mean, maybe that's not ideal, but it beats the alternative of just this frustration week after week.
Yeah, for me, I feel like they need to build some gimme throws to Q, whether it's bubbles or slants or just something where you're getting the ball to him early, hitches, so he can do something with it after the reception. He's pretty good after the catch, but I don't think they give him enough opportunities to get the ball to him.
That is after the catch is doing a lot of work right there.
Yeah, they got to give him the ball in space early so he can do something with it afterwards. It can't just be, deep comebacks or go routes. He has 16 yards per reception. Again, 6 touchdowns. That's nothing to sneeze at. But I really feel like they need to feed him the ball early, get him involved in the offense early so he can be more impactful when they really need him at the end of the game.
I'm curious too. Like I said, I mean, we'll see with Dobbins. You're so right. Like even if he's not out for a significant period of time, I think on a short week, you're probably going to play it safe with a guy who's done so much for you. I'm curious what you think about the other options. I mean, you mentioned Gus, but Hassan Haskins and Kamani Vidal, there was a lot of excitement about Vidal in training camp. He is a rookie. He's been inactive for the last month. They've done next to nothing in the regular season, and rightfully so with the season that Dobbins has been having. But if he's unavailable, do you see more of a role for either of those guys?
Yeah, maybe early in the game for either one of those guys. They've used Haskins in goal line situations, and he's ran the ball pretty effectively. I think the issue is whenever you're using a guy that's inexperienced, you're worried about fumbles. And they're at the end of the season. These are important games. So I think you would tend to lean on somebody with a little more experience in those situations. So maybe you give them some carries early, but then I think you're going to see a lot of Edwards late in the game when you need to protect the football.
I said this when we recapped Monday Night Football with Carmen Vitale, but all things considered, I know a lot of yards were given up to the Ravens and a lot of points, and I know what happened in the late game against Cincinnati too, but I come out of this stretch feeling, I mean, I feel good about the Chargers overall, but Jesse Minter's defense as well, the way they were able to buckle down at the end of the game against Cincinnati, and even knowing what the Ravens did, like the pressure percentage is on point for the Chargers. They're fifth in the league in pressures over the last 2 weeks. Really feels like they should have a great opportunity to put pressure on Kirk Cousins and make this difficult for Atlanta. I don't think the box score says that, but just watching them play, I think this is a legit unit.
Yeah, no doubt. And this is going to be a different game playing the Falcons than it was playing one of the best offenses in the league in the Ravens. And, give Cousins credit. He's played in every game coming off of that torn Achilles. We didn't know if he was going to be able to make it this far into the season. And he's been effective and given life to a group of playmakers that fantasy folks really were hoping would happen going into this year. But when you look at Cousins' numbers against pressure, 8 interceptions, that jumps out at you. So if they can heat up the pass rush a little bit, get in Cousins' face, I feel like there's an opportunity for him to give the Chargers the football. And I do feel like they'll be able to get home against a Falcons offense that has, been prone to giving up pressures this season.
One thing that stands out to me for the Falcons is they have a fantastic rushing attack, and I would argue it could be a hell of a lot better. They're 8th in rushing success rate. They're 22nd in total carries. They only average 25 attempts per game. And I know a couple games have gotten away from them. I get it. When you're getting your butt kicked by Denver, you're not going to be handing the rock off a whole lot. But even in games that are close, it often feels like the Falcons forget that they have Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. I know that the stats say the Chargers have a great run defense, but the Ravens had plenty of success. Like, I'm begging the Falcons to commit to the run in this game and see what they can see.
Well, Zach Robinson is a Sean McVay disciple, and we know Sean McVay will forget that he has a running back at times. So it's not surprising to hear you reel off those numbers and see that somebody like Zach Robinson will, forget that he has a pretty good running back and Bijan Robinson, and maybe not lean on that running game more than perhaps he should. You're right. I do feel like, although the Chargers' numbers are good defensively in terms of defending the run, there are some opportunities to run the ball against that defense, and they're not as stout as they should be. And part of the reason is they're still, again, in year one of that rebuild. I don't think they have as many frontline players as they would like on that defensive line to be stout against the run. So, yes, I think there will be opportunities for Atlanta to run the football effectively.
Let's take it to Sunday Night Football. 49ers, another team traveling cross country after a disappointing result. They take on the Buffalo Bills on Sunday Night Football. And again, let's just be transparent. It's a Tuesday afternoon. We don't know what the latest status is with Brock Purdy. Of course, when we recorded this last week, we had no idea Brock Purdy was going to miss against the Packers. It was one of those that just kind of came out of nowhere.
Yep.
Do you have any sense of how concerned we should be? I mean, I'm holding out hope that this isn't a season ender for Brock Purdy, but the way that this just kind of cropped up on the 49ers, I mean, it's got to give you pause.
I think anytime you're dealing with a throwing shoulder for a quarterback, you should be concerned. And the fact that he wasn't able to play, again, that's concerning to me. And it cropped up late in the week. After the initial MRI, they felt like nothing was wrong, and he was good to go. He was able to do some light throwing, according to Kyle Shanahan, on Monday, so that's promising. We'll see how that progresses later in the week. But again, like Dobbins for the Chargers, this is a long-term concern for the 49ers, considering the kind of check that they're probably going to write for him in the offseason. So if he has to be out another week and they want to make sure that he's healthy, I think that they would probably make that decision to not play him, even though I know Brock is the kind of guy that's going to want to be out there playing in important games like this at the end of the year. The other thing that was curious to me was the starting Brandon Allen instead of Josh Dobbs. I know Allen's more familiar with that offense, has been around longer, but Dobbs played in 12 games last year. And again, I know he wasn't amazing in those games, but he's played football, winning football closer, in terms of, when you look at Allen or Dobbs. And so if Purdy can't play, and Shanahan's already said this, he's probably going to be Allen. Again, I'm curious about that decision because I feel like Dobbs is more mobile. The offensive line's banged up. Interested to see who they end up going with.
That is a really good point, and it kind of gets lost because there's so much going on with the Niners other than which reserve quarterback they play. But I mean, you're right, Josh Dobbs. He had fantastic performances against the Saints, and I think it was the Falcons last year where he was able to get wins. He beat the Cowboys before he was traded from Arizona.
Yep.
That is very interesting to me, especially when you consider the stuff you could do with the running game with a guy like Josh Dobbs. I'll be very honest with you. I hadn't really considered that because I think you kind of default to thinking like, well, you're kind of screwed when your starter's out anyway, but maybe not when you have a quarterback with a skill set like Josh Dobbs.
And I'm interested in what the weather's going to be like this weekend. In Buffalo, sounds like there's going to be a winter storm warning. I've covered a handful of games in Buffalo where weather was a factor. It's also a tough place in terms of special teams. When you talk about the kicking game, you're dealing with a young kicker in Moody that hasn't kicked there before, already has 4 missed kicks. We don't want to see a repeat of what happened between the long snapper and Debo, in terms of things getting heated up because of missed kicks. So I think special teams, which, has been a struggle for San Francisco this season, is something to keep an eye on as well if we're looking at adverse weather conditions in Buffalo.
Let me ask you this, and it's something it stood out to me about that Green Bay game, and the quarterback conversation is going to dominate this thing. But the Niners have plenty of problems regardless of whether or not Brock Purdy is available. Next Gen Stats credited them with 22 missed tackles against the Packers. That was a quarter of their misses for the year in one afternoon. And I think they're second in total missed tackles on the year, which is just not something you expect to hear about a defense that has Fred Warner on it. And I know Nick Bosa didn't play in that game. I have a feeling you can't chalk all of that up to not having Nick Bosa. I mean, do you have a reason for optimism that was a one-off? Because I don't like the sound of that when you're going against Josh Allen and James Cook.
I think it's a combination of all those things. And when you watch Warner, he looks tentative in terms of he's not sure where he wants to go. And I don't think that's because he doesn't know what he's doing. I think he's concerned about the guys around him knowing what they're doing. You have young guys playing in that secondary as well, Malik and Renardo Green. You have a linebacker that's playing there that maybe you're not fully confident in. They do start the window of Dre Greenlaw coming back from Achilles this week. So it looks like maybe he can get back out there in the next couple of weeks. And that would be huge for this defense to get another veteran guy at second level. But just looks like there's been a lot of miscommunications, and I think that's leading to the missed tackles, as well as having more inexperienced players at all 3 levels of that defense. Obviously, not having Bosa out there is huge. Leonard Floyd did have 2 sacks, so hopefully you can kind of build on that. But you're going to be playing a team in Buffalo that wants to run the football. James Cook is having a nice year. He has 10 touchdowns on the season. We know what Josh Allen can do in terms of the running game, and they are calling more design runs for him in the second half of the season. So I think bottom line is they're going to have to be more sound fundamentally in terms of their tackling against a team that, can move the football offensively.
It reminds me of the Bills-Cowboys game from last year. I mean, the weather in Buffalo starts to be a problem around Thanksgiving, and I don't know if it'll look like it did in Cleveland the other night, but at the very least, it's got to think about it. I'm sure the Bills would love to play a grimy ground and pound sort of game. Interested to see how they play that. I don't have a ton on the Bills. Just they're 7-point favorites in this game, especially if Brock Purdy can't go. I expect the Bills to handle business. The crazy thing about that is, depending on the Miami Green Bay result, if the Dolphins lose in Green Bay on Thursday night, the Bills can win the AFC East Thanksgiving weekend, which I think that is a remarkable stat for a team that a lot of people expected to quote unquote take a step back. This would be the earliest they've ever won the division on this run that they've been on.
Yeah, that's crazy to think about that. And I think they still have stuff to play for beyond winning the division. They could potentially be the number 1 seed. this is a tough 3-game stretch for them. They host the Niners, they go to the Rams, they go to the Lions. And so if they kind of want to continue to be in that conversation to potentially be the number 1 seed, if the Chiefs slip up, they have to kind of handle business and take care of these games. One person that has emerged for the Bills is Khalil Shakir. He has a 85% catch rate, 457 yards after the catch. He's kind of emerged as the go-to guy that Allen is looking for on offense. In terms of San Francisco's offense, Jordan Mason, 6 carries, 26 yards since McCaffrey's been back. Seems like he needs to touch the ball a little bit more. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I get, they extended McCaffrey again before the season. He's the best running back in the world when he's fully healthy. But yeah, I mean, you would expect some sort of ramp up period after an absence like that. And it's almost like Kyle Shanahan said, no, we're good. We're going full steam ahead with CMC. And I hate to criticize the guy, but yeah, like you had success with Jordan Mason. It seems silly to completely remove him from the equation.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I know they paid Christian a ton of money, but he is coming off an Achilles injury. It seems like you kind of want to ramp up the activity.
You see this stuff all the time. Yeah, like all the time where you're like, all right, we got a pitch count. This is our plan for the first 3 weeks, and you can be full go after that. I mean, he's been productive, probably not as productive as you would prefer. Mm-hmm. And again, not productive enough that you can't find a role for Jordan Mason, all things considered.
He hasn't gotten the end zone in 3 games. That's telling to me.
It's going to be interesting to watch. On top of that, Deebo Samuel, 1 catch on 4 targets, 21. I mean, I know you got a backup quarterback.
Yeah.
I went and looked this up. He's averaging 2.7 yards of separation this season, which would be his lowest number by a substantial margin. So, I'm not writing the Niners off quite yet, but if this season goes where it looks like it's going, there's going to be a few very interesting conversations and situations for the Niners to sort through.
I agree. It's going to be an interesting offseason for the Niners, and we'll continue to talk about them. But this is the team I still kind of believe in because of the talent level. I just feel like they're gonna figure it out in that division because I feel like, again, their pedigree based on what they've done in the past.
We'll say another loss in Buffalo. It's going to make it tough. Like at some point you run out of runway to make this happen. And another loss here, maybe it's not the death knell, but man, it would be a remarkable turnaround if they were able to dig it out of the ditch. So a huge game for San Francisco and a chance for Buffalo to lock up the division Thanksgiving weekend. It's just crazy to talk about. We'll see how it goes. Eric, I appreciate you hopping on with me, man. I hope you have a fun, safe Thanksgiving weekend, and we'll chat with you soon, man.
Time now for a Thanksgiving edition of the Super Six. It's presented by DraftKings. If you don't know the Super Six, head on over to foxsports.com and the Fox Sports app. Play it this weekend. Essentially, you make 6 bets, 6 picks. Could be props, could be scores, over-unders. You get the gist. You make 6 of them. If you hit all 6, you can win big. And this week's edition, hats off to the Super Six for the wordplay, because this week's bets have fun little phrases like which receiver will roast the opposing secondary with the most receiving yards. You get it. It's turkey time. You get the gist of it. Love a good pun. And I'm going to roll with this one. That's the prop I'm going to pick to help you on your way toward the Super Six. Choices are CeeDee Lamb against the Giants, Malik Neighbors against the Cowboys, Amon-Ra St. Brown against the Bears, Tyreek Hill against the Green Bay Packers. So 4 guys that are playing on Thanksgiving. Who's going to get the most receiving yards and roast the opponent? I'm going to go with Malik Neighbors. I'm buying into the hype. I think Drew Lock's going to start for the Giants, and I think that'll invigorate this New York passing game. It hasn't been pretty most of the year, but Malik Neighbors is a special talent. It was against Dallas on a Thursday earlier this season that he caught 12 for 115. He's got that type of potential. Drew Lock, maybe not the future of the New York Giants, but he's got the talent to hang out and throw the ball up for Malik a few times on one Thanksgiving afternoon. Maybe it'll be like Randy Moss all over again, going all the way back to the 90s when Randy dusted the Cowboys for like 180 and 3 touchdowns. I mean, I don't know if it's going to be that great, but I think Malik Neighbors is due for a game that reminds people just how good he is. We've been waiting on it for a little while. Drew Lock is the key. I'm going with Malik Neighbors. This is already a beast of a preview episode, so we'll try to make this quick. But we do still have 8 more games to get to, and we're going to touch on all of them. No game goes ignored on the NFL on Fox podcast. So that's why we have the Hurry Up Offense. We'll go through the rest of the Week 13 schedule, touch on something about all the rest of the games on the schedule, get you out of here, get you on with your holiday weekend. My awesome producer's going to put 2 minutes on the clock. I'm going to beat it. I promise I am. Give you something interesting about all the rest of the games left on the schedule. We will start with the Black Friday game. Second year we're doing a Black Friday game. The Raiders heading out to play the Kansas City Chiefs in the return game here. Chiefs are one of just 3 teams that can clinch a playoff spot in Week 13. More interesting than that to me, because they're going to clinch a spot eventually regardless. If the Chiefs win, Pat Mahomes gets to 100 career wins. That would tie Tom Brady for the most wins in NFL history by a quarterback in his first 8 seasons, as if you needed another stat of how rare Pat Mahomes' career has been. Browns at Broncos. Bo Nix can become the first rookie ever with 200 passing yards and 2+ touchdown passes in 5 straight home games. Kind of a mouthful, but it just speaks to just how good he has been here in the last, 6, 7, 8 weeks of the season. He has been remarkable. Rams at Saints. Big game for the LA Rams. Their playoff odds jump as high as 17% if they beat the Saints. They dip as low as 7 if they lose. Not as much to play for the Saints, but trust me, they would still love to ruin a Rams season after 2018. Have they moved on from that? No, they have not. Seahawks at Jets. Another mouthful, but an interesting stat. Mike Macdonald is the only first-time head coach who right now has a winning record. That is important because we've had 7 consecutive seasons where a first-time head coach gets his team to the playoffs. Maybe it's Mike Macdonald. Colts at Patriots. Colts have the easiest remaining strength of schedule in the league. Last 5 opponents are just 17-40. That said, this feels like a tough game to me. Titans at Commanders. Very quietly, Will Levis, a 109 passer rating in his last 3 games despite being sacked 20 times. First player since the merger who can say that. Texans at Jags. Trevor Lawrence is back on the practice field. That's a good sign for the Jags. Although I just want to say CJ Stroud has been phenomenal in 3 career starts against the Jags. I bet he keeps it up. Buccaneers at Panthers. Tampa 7-1 against Carolina since 2020. But last year, both of these games were very, very uncomfy for Tampa Bay. I didn't quite make it. I just have lasting memories of Tampa sneaking out of Charlotte with a 9-0 win against the Panthers. Could something equally goofy happen this week? I think it's at least possible. That does it for the Hurry Up Offense. That does it for a loaded Thanksgiving preview. Football, wall to wall, all day Thursday. Got a game on Friday. Got the usual slate on Sunday. No buys this week, so nobody's taking time off. We are getting so much football in Week 13. And we will be back on the other side, as we always are, to recap it. We'll have insight, analysis from the booths. We'll break down all the big moments, all the things you need to know. It'll be right here. Make sure you're subscribed. If you're not, go find us wherever you prefer to get your podcast. We will be there for you. So on Monday, you can get your fix as we inch closer to the postseason. I can't believe it's already here. It's the holidays. Hope you have a happy Thanksgiving, a safe, tasty, happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you on the other side of the weekend. As always, I appreciate it. I'll talk to you real soon.